Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 version of Napa County Reads. My name is Barbara Nemko, and it's my honor to serve as Napa County Superintendent of Schools. We've been doing Napa County Reads since 2004, and in this very difficult and challenging year, it was a great pleasure to be able to do something that seemed normal. So before I introduce our wonderful author, Gregory Mohn, I want to thank the Napa County Reads Committee, starting with the amazing Shauna Wagner, who has taken on this project for years and does a fabulous job coordinating every part of it. I also want to thank the other committee members, Jennifer Stroman, Mary Smart, Sue Evans, Sonia Ayala, Asha Leverett McDowell, Jennifer Baker, Julie McClure, Barbara Thorson, Supervisor Brad Wagenknecht, Jenny Banta, Shauna Falk, Anthony Halstead. And special thanks to Community Projects for helping us provide many books to many students, and Napa Book Mine for supporting the program. And other books in the Jack and the Genius series and other books by author Gregory Mohn can be found at Napa Book Mine or in the library. So if you would like to continue reading books by the same author, we make it easy for you. So now let me turn to our author. Gregory Mohn is the author of, or co-author of 12 books for children and adults, including 4 New York Times bestsellers. He's a contributing editor and former columnist for Popular Science magazine, and his journalism has been featured in Best American Science Writing and other anthologies. But mostly, he's a really good guy. He's a graduate of Harvard College, lives in Massachusetts today, and has a wife who is a first grade teacher and 3 children. A couple of things that really stood out for me about him. Number one, he identifies Toby, his dog, as his writing partner, because he gets his best ideas walking with Toby in the woods. Second thing is he talked about when he was a child wanting to write things about dragons with flatulence. Now, if you are a young person and you're saying, what's flatulence? It's a great vocabulary word for you to go and look up. He began his career writing in San Francisco, so once he was our neighbor. And his next book is coming out in April, and it's called Atlantis, The Accidental Invasion. So this book, in the Jack and the Genius series, is one of 3. And I think that's all I want to say, because I want you to spend most of your time with our wonderful author, Gregory Mohn. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Mrs. Nemko. I really appreciate it. I want to just say quickly thank you to you, Mrs. Nemko, to Mrs. Wagner, the Napa County Reads Commission, the Napa County Library, Book Mine, and everyone else who's been involved in this. I wish I was out there with you guys, running around to the different schools all day and then popping into the library tonight, but this is the best we could do. And I figured since it's an evening event, I got dressed up. You know, I put my sort of fancy jacket on, and I sort of put a tie on. I forgot how to tie one, but I think I got it right. And yeah, I'm excited to get started. So why don't we do it? First, I'll give you a little tour of some of my books here. So I'm a writer. That's what I do. I write books, and I write books about all kinds of different stuff. So let's see. I've got a book here that I wrote with someone named Susan Kane about introverts and what it's like to be quiet and how being quiet is a superpower. I wrote a book about Santa Claus and the science of Santa Claus and how he uses wormholes and robots to accomplish his seemingly impossible annual mission. We got these Bill Nye books, which we're going to talk about in a second. Another Bill Nye book, and a few adventures. I like writing adventures. This one here is an adventure on Titanic. This one here is called Fish, and that's an adventure, a big pirate adventure. Now, some of you might be wondering, my daughter wondered this. When my books with Bill Nye came out, she said, "Dad, why is his name so big and gigantic and your name is all little down here?" And then I had this book with Neil deGrasse Tyson, another famous scientist, come out, and she said, "Dad, Why is his name in rainbows and your name is all little down at the bottom? And I will tell you why. So, Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye, they each have millions and millions of followers on Instagram. Gregory Moen has about 11 followers on social media because I'm not that into it. So, kids, I'm not saying be big on social media or that it's important. I'm just saying that your name is going to be a little bit bigger if you are. Now, usually, well, let's see. I was thinking about something else here. When I was your age, I didn't really think I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. I was pretty convinced I was going to be an NBA basketball player. You know, I was going to play for the Boston Celtics or maybe the Los Angeles Lakers or the New York Knicks or something like that. But then when I got a little bit older than fifth grade, about seventh grade, I was on a football team too. And my friends and I had this football game, and one of our parents videoed it. And then we went back to the kid's house and watched the game on the TV afterwards. And I'm watching this game, and I see this kid running down the field. And he's got a helmet on, and I can't quite see his numbers, so I can't figure out who it is. And I'm watching him run, and I thought, oh my gosh, that kid is the worst runner I've ever seen in my life. And I started kind of laughing a little bit, and I elbowed my buddy who was sitting next to me, and I said, who is that? Who runs like that on our team? And my friend just kind of stopped. And I said, wait, no, really, who is it? And he goes, Greg, that's you. And so once I realized I ran like that, and I kind of ran more like a duck than a human, I thought, okay, maybe my NBA career isn't going to take off. Now, as I got older, I always liked writing stories, but I never really was trying to be a writer. I would write funny emails and little notes to friends and stuff like that. And then after college, I had a couple random jobs, and I had this one job where I worked with all these really kind of unusual people. And my job was a little bit strange, and I worked at this company in Sausalito in California, right near you guys. And everybody in the office thought they were really, really, really smart. But no one really did anything. I couldn't figure out what they did. So I came up with this idea for a book about a guy who works in an office and thinks he's the reincarnation of Albert Einstein. So he thinks he's like the smartest person in the world. And that became my first published book here, this one, The Wages of Genius. Now, I'm not going to tell you guys too much about this book because I'll be honest with you, it's pretty boring. Nothing fun happens. But usually when people would ask me, when they find out I'm a writer and they'd say, hey, Greg, what was your first book? I'd tell them about that one, you know, the boring one. But then a little while ago, a few years ago, my mom sends me this book in the mail and she says, Greg, I found your first book. Now, I thought she was talking about this one because I'm pretty sure that the only copies I sold of that book were ones that my mom secretly bought. But no, she wasn't talking about that. She said, no, I found the first book you wrote when you were little. So she sends me this thing in the mail. And I think we have a picture of it here. Let's see. All right. So you look at it and you're not that impressed at first, right? Because it's just kind of an old marble composition notebook. And actually, if you were to zoom in a little bit, and we don't have to here, but if you were to zoom in, you could see that I spelled my name correctly and the name of my school. But then when it came to my home phone number, well, let's see, there was a 7 in it, and I got that backwards. Then I got a 4 backwards, and then I stuck a K in there for some reason. I don't know many people who have a K in their home phone number. So right away, I'm looking at the cover and I'm thinking, I don't know what my mom is talking about here because I couldn't even get my letters straight. Then I opened the book up and I'm expecting to see poems or stories or, you know, things like that down. And instead, the first thing I see when I open the page is this giant dinosaur. And not only that, this dinosaur is scientifically completely inaccurate, right? It's got these tiny little hands. It's got the largest tail on a dinosaur that I've ever seen. Like, I don't think this thing would be able to move at all. Not only that, it seems to be wearing high heels. And as far as I know, I'm not like a paleontologist or a dinosaur expert, but I don't think any dinosaurs wore high heels. Now, on top of all that, the dinosaur seems to have some kind of flatulence problem where I don't know what it ate, but there's this strange cloud moving away from its rear end and hitting this flying girl in the face. So right away, I thought, I don't know why my mom's calling this a book. And then I turned the page, and the next thing you see is some random Martian alien war where it looks like the aliens are flying around and flying tacos or something like that. Then you turn the page again, and we have a vampire jumping on top of some kind of cowboy pirate's head. So I'm turning the pages and I'm looking through this whole book, and it's just filled with these random drawings. There's almost no words at all. It's just there are drawings of sharks attacking fishing boats and all kinds of strange stuff like that. The only words in the whole book are this next page here, where what we have here, and maybe we'll zoom in a little bit. What we have here is a Smurf fight. Okay, I don't know if any of you guys know the Smurfs, but they were big when I was young too. I know they were big for a little while there when the movies came out. And we have one Smurf here is saying, put your dukes up, like your fists. And the other Smurf is saying no. So one Smurf wants to fight and the other one doesn't. And we can shrink it again. Now, if you look also, you'll see that the P in up is backwards. And then the N in no is a complete mess. There's no punctuation, nothing. So I've only got 5 words in the whole book, and I couldn't even get those right. But the more I thought about it, the more I decided, you know what, I think my mom's right. I think this is my first book. Because even though I didn't really know how to spell, and I got some of my letters backwards, and there wasn't even that much writing at all to begin with, I still think this is a book. And I think anyone who does this, any kid who does this, is a writer just as much as I am. Okay. So I hope if there are kids listening out there, and I think we got some kids on the line here today, I hope that you guys remember some of these lessons that I'm going to give you today about writing, and maybe you can write your own stories. So we're going to go through Jack and the Geniuses and how it came about. But the first lesson I wanted to give you about writing is that, any good story has to start with an idea, right? Now, I call this idea a spark because it's an idea that should get you excited, okay? Now, my first kids book here, Fish, the spark for that one was these crazy treasure hunts I used to do for my nieces and nephews. For this one, Dangerous Waters, let's see, this is more of a fun cover. So this is a Titanic adventure, and the spark for this book is actually a little bit crazy. So years ago, before I wrote the book, I went on a fishing trip with my dad. We went out really, really early in the morning. It was just me and my dad and this captain, Captain Dave, right? And we left the dock at around 6 in the morning, and we drove about an hour out offshore. We fished for a couple hours. We caught a bunch of fish, and it was a beautiful morning. And then we're finishing up, and we turned to go back towards the dock, and we had a long trip still, an hour to get back to the dock. And the sea was really calm, and this really thick fog had settled in. So we couldn't really see anything. And there was like gentle waves where the boat was kind of rocking, but not much. And we'd gotten up really early, so I started yawning and I got tired. And I said to my dad and Captain Dave, I said, hey guys, do you mind if I take a quick nap? And there was a little cabin in the front of the boat, but it was one of those tiny ones where you can't really stretch out. Your feet are hanging off the end. But they said, yeah, sure, go take a nap. So I went down into the cabin of at the bow of the boat. I laid down and I fell sound asleep. Okay. I don't even know how long I was sleeping, but at some point I woke up like with a jolt, and I felt that my back was wet. I'm like, why is my back all wet? And then I looked down and my feet were in a puddle in the bottom of the boat. And I thought, this is strange, So I stood up, kind of scratching my head, very confused, and I walked up onto the deck. And I get up there and my dad is in the co-pilot seat and he's knocked out. And the captain, Captain Dave, he's not in the pilot's chair anymore. He's walking around in the back of the boat, holding his fishing rods, totally stunned. And there's water sloshing all around on the bottom of the boat. So I look at my dad and I look at Captain Dave and I said, what's going on? I woke up my dad. He was very confused. Captain Dave was confused until I finally said, hey, Dave, what's happening? What happened here? And he looks at me and he goes, Greg, we hit another boat in the fog. He said, our ship is sinking. We got to get off this boat. So luckily, as it turns out, this part wasn't lucky, but as it turned out, we did hit another boat in this really thick fog. And Captain Dave's boat got a hole in it and it started to sink. Luckily, the other boat came back around and pulled alongside us. And my dad and the captain and I climbed off of the boat, and we were still in we were in about waist deep water by the time we got off. And we got onto the other boat, and then within a couple minutes, the Captain Dave's boat sank and disappeared in 80 feet of water, right? Now, it's not Titanic, okay? There were 3 people on board. All of us survived with minor injuries. But ever since I had that experience, I thought, wow, I need to write a sinking ship story, right? But I didn't just want to write a little sinking ship story like mine. I wanted to write about the biggest, craziest one of that we know of, in recent history. So that kind of became the spark for the Titanic book. Now, the one I'm really excited to talk about today, though, is Jack and the Geniuses with Bill Nye. Now, this is a little bit of a longer story, but I think it's kind of a funny one. So I'm going to tell it. So a few years ago, I'm out in Los Angeles and I'm out there for work. I'm supposed to interview this really interesting scientist, a guy who he actually works for Hollywood and he tries to help them get the science right on their movies. So they bring him in and they ask him science questions about, hey, does this make sense? Or what would Iron Man's suit really work like? And he tells them, okay? So this guy's brilliant, super creative, really interesting. And I'm out there to write a story about him and his work. And I'd made plans to meet him this one day. And before I go meet anyone and interview them for a story, I try to sort of learn as much as I can about them and write down all my questions that I want to ask them and things like that. So I got up really early and I went to this coffee shop and I started taking notes in my notebook. And when I go in a coffee shop and I'm taking my notes, I just don't notice anything else that's going on around me. So I'm sitting there, and when I got there, it was empty. But I'm sitting there taking my notes, drinking my coffee, listening to my music. And finally, after about an hour, I closed it up, I looked up, and I stretched a little bit, and I look, and sitting across from me, right nearby at this table, is Bill Nye, the science guy. And I was like, whoa, Bill Nye's here. And not only that, but just the day before, one of my friends who I worked with at Popular Science magazine had been talking about Bill Nye and how much he loved those old videos that Bill does, that Bill did that are up on Netflix, right? So I said, oh, I have to introduce myself and I have to tell him I'm a Popular Science editor and blah, blah, blah. So I did. And we started talking. And I don't know how we got on it because we started talking about science, but one thing led to another. And for some reason, we started talking about surfing. Now, I love surfing. I've surfed for a really long time. Got my new surfboard over here for the kids and me a little bit. So we started talking about surfing. And Bill says that he was trying to learn how to surf. So I thought, oh, well, this is maybe a good opportunity here because I had already made plans to go surfing the next day with a friend of mine. And I said, Bill, I'm going surfing tomorrow. You want to join me? Maybe I can give you a few tips or something like that. So he actually said yes, which I was very surprised by. And I said, all right, well, we're going to this place here. We're going to meet at 7 a.m. and I'll see you there. If you make it, great. And he said, all right, great. And so I left. I went off and did my interview and talked to this crazy, cool Hollywood scientist. And the day went on. And the next morning, I got up early. I went and met my friend at this beach at 7 a.m. We got our wetsuits on and our boards. We're walking down to the water. And then I remembered, I was like, oh, wait, hey, Ben, hold on a second, because I'm supposed to meet someone else here. And he's like, what are you talking about? Who are we meeting? I said, well, actually, we're going to give Bill Nye, the science guy, a surfing lesson. And he was like, what? What are you talking about? I said, no, really. He said, you're lying. You're making things up. And I have a reputation for fibbing sometimes because I write novels and stuff. But I said, no, this is real. This is a true story. He's actually coming. And sure enough, Bill comes running down the beach a little while later with his surfboard. He's like, hi, guys. Hey, Greg, I'm coming. So anyway, we paddle out. It was kind of a mellow day, nice little waves, nothing too crazy. And we're sitting there and Ben's catching some waves and I'm riding some waves. And we're giving Bill tips, hey, go for that one. That's a good one. But Bill's not really going for them. Instead, he's sitting on his board and he's watching the water and the waves. And he's talking about the science of the waves. And he's telling me how waves form when they're way out in the middle of the ocean, when wind hits the water and transfers its energy into the ocean. And then how the waves maintain that energy as they flow through open ocean because there's no obstructions. And then when they get to the shore, why they break one way over here and one way over there. And he's talking about the science of waves forever. And when he's done talking about the science of waves, he starts talking about weather and climate and the difference between weather and climate. And then it's on to climate change and the climate crisis. And when he's all done with that, he starts talking about his watch and what an amazing mechanical marvel a watch is. Now, normally, when I go surfing with someone, I don't like them to talk too much. But this guy was so funny and fascinating that I thought I could listen to him talk about science all day. So we had a great time out there. And we decided, well, let's stay in touch and see if we can, work on a project together at some point. So a little while later, Bill does get back in touch with me. He says, Greg, I got a great idea. He said, I've always used videos and television and Netflix and things like that to sort of spread my passion for science and technology. He said, but I'd love to find a new way to get kids interested. He said, I was thinking about, a series of novels focused around kids using science and technology. I said, well, that's a great idea, Bill. You should totally do it. And he said, no, I don't want to do it alone. He said, I need some help. You got to do it with me. So we started talking about some different ideas. First of all, Bill told me about this book that he used to read, this series of books that he used to read when he was younger. So if we show the next slide, about this kid named Tom Swift. And Tom Swift was like this boy inventor who could do anything. And Bill said this was a major force in getting him into engineering and science. Now, Tom Swift built like robots and motorcycles and cool things. I think he built some kind of weird helicopter too. Anyway, but Bill's telling me about this, and I said, wait a minute, Bill, this is kind of cool because I've met some real life kids who build stuff like this today. So if we go to the next slide, for example, I used to write these stories about real kids building stuff, and we had this column in Popular Science called "You Built What," where it's basically kids and adults who built crazy stuff. One kid I talked to one time, he built a nuclear reactor in his bedroom. Not a great idea, but it was pretty cool. His was safe. This kid here, right? This kid had read about, he was 14 years old, and he'd read about these military veterans coming home from war and having amputations of their arm and not having a good prosthetic arm that they could use to do basic things around their house. So this kid was so impacted by the story that he said, you know what? I'm going to try to build them a better robotic arm. So he did it all. He taught himself about robotics and electrical engineering and mechanical engineering just online in his spare time. And then using spare parts he found around junkyards. And I mean, he's got part of a bicycle chain in there. The hand is 3D printed, but the tendons in the hand, so our hands have tendons that hold the bones together. He actually used dental rubber bands from his mom's, his mom worked at an orthodontist office. So he used whatever he could find, and he built this working robotic hand when he was only in 8th or 9th grade. It's amazing stuff. And now he's gone on, he's older now, and he's actually built this whole amazing company out of it. So I was telling Bill about this kid, and I was telling about all these other kids who've done amazing stuff. Like if we go to the next slide, these two girls built a perfect replica of one of the rovers that's up on Mars, one of the Spirit and Opportunity rovers. Or this kid here who built something hilarious but still totally awesome, a shopping cart that he turned into a go-kart. Or the next guy here, another one of my all-time favorites. This kid, this was a real inspiration for the Jack and the Geniuses story. This kid actually built a submarine out of spare parts, right? So he actually spent 6 months turning all these different pieces he found into a working submarine. Or this next kid here, another one of my favorites, he took his dad's old easy chair and he converted it into basically a chair car that he could use, and he could go around 30 miles an hour around his neighborhood. Now, one of the weirder things about this project here is that I actually, we'll get into this a little bit later, but whenever I write about something, I try to become an expert in the subject. And I found out when I was researching this kid and his chair car that a 30-mile-an-hour chair is actually not that fast for a piece of furniture. So someone else had built a couch that goes about 90 miles an hour. And then the fastest piece of furniture in the world, I ended up writing a story about this too. This guy built a dining room table that goes 130 miles an hour. And my favorite thing about it was that when he really cranked it up to speed, it was a dining room table, and the whole thing was set with all this fake food. So it's got like a fake roasted turkey, and it's got place settings with all these vegetables and candles and everything. And when he got it up to speed and he kicked in this nitrous oxide injection system that actually had flames shooting out of the back of the turkey's butt. Yeah, pretty cool stuff. 130-mile-an-hour dining room table. So anyway, I'm telling Bill about all these kids who build amazing, amazing stuff. And I said, what if we use kids like this as the inspiration for the kids in Jack and the Geniuses? And he's like, yeah, I like that. I like that. So we came up with, 3 different characters. We said we want to have 3 characters, and we really wanted it to be a diverse cast. So we thought, well, they can't really be from the same family. So, and we wanted them to be strong, it's like, really driven, strong, independent characters. Now, so Ava here kind of became she was the model for like some of those kids that, the kid who built the robotic arm in his bedroom, or the girls with the rovers, or the kid who built his own submarine. They kind of became the inspiration for Ava. Matt here knows everything about science and technology and the way the world works. And like, if you took Matt surfing, he would probably talk about the science of the waves instead of actually trying to catch a wave. So Matt's a little bit more like Bill Nye. Ava's a lot like those kids I just told you about. And then we were thinking about Jack, and we thought, well, we don't want to have every kid in this story be some kind of super genius like these two. But Bill and I were talking, and one of the things that we learned from speaking to a lot of scientists over the years, he does in his work and I do in my work as well. When you ask a scientist, what does it take to be a great physicist or a great chemist or a great earth scientist or geologist? They never say you have to be a genius. You don't have to be brilliant. They all say what you need is you need to be curious and you need to ask a lot of questions. So we thought, what if with the main character, Jack, instead of having him be some super genius, if we just made him really, really curious? And so that became kind of the idea behind Jack. Now, 3 characters are not enough to make a story, right? So we started talking and we came up with some other kind of conditions or rules for this series. Bill said, we really need kind of an Obi-Wan Kenobi type character to guide these kids. And so that's how we came up with this character, Hank, who's also very much based on Bill Nye. Now, I wanted to call him Bob, but Bill has a really good friend named Bob who actually played a major role on Star Trek. I forget who he was. I think he was the doctor. And he said, we can't call him Bob, and we got to call him Hank. And honestly, that was our only big argument during the whole writing of this series, was Bob versus Hank. And Bill won. And Hank's kind of a good name. I like it. So we needed an Obi-Wan type character, Hank Witherspoon. We needed a good villain. I think every story needs a good villain. I actually keep some little reminders for myself. So I like to have, little toys around. I know it's kind of weird. A grown man keeps toys on his desk, but it's okay. So I've got Kylo Ren here because I think he's a pretty good villain. I liked him better when he had his mask on. So that reminds me, you got to have good villains in a story. And I also have Wonder Woman here. So you got to have really strong female characters like Ava. Now, we said, all right, we need a good villain. We need bow ties, okay? Because Bill Nye, the bow ties, right? And we didn't realize that at first. It wasn't until we kind of really got going with the story that we thought, someone's got to wear a bow tie in this story. And we decided to have it be Jack because we thought that would be fun to have a kid who's really serious about his ties and maybe his hair. Now, to be honest, I don't think Jack would wear purple pants like he does in these covers, but we'll let that slide. We needed a mystery, right? A mystery there's nothing to make you turn the pages of a book like a mystery, right? Trying to solve a mystery and figure out who did it. The other rule, no jetpacks. Bill was huge on this. And this rule isn't just about jetpacks. Really what it's about is we wanted to have a story, a series, where there was everything in the book, every piece of technology or every invention had to be possible. And anything that the kids built, it had to be something that a kid could build, right? Now, I already showed you real life kids who've built amazing stuff. So in this story, the kids do amazing stuff, right? I mean, Ava builds her own robotic submarine and a talking toaster and a motorized skateboard and all sorts of cool stuff. But this is real. Real kids actually do this stuff. So no jetpacks just means you can't have science fiction-y type technology where people are flying around in jetpacks. Now, I should say, though, that for this next book, this Atlantis book, I did break that a lot. So there's tons of weird science fiction-y stuff, including basically jetpacks. The other thing, we wanted these books to address really big real-world problems, okay? So Bill, in particular, is very keen on solving three big problems. So he wants everyone in the world to have a good, clean source of water. He wants us all to have clean, renewable energy, right? And he really wants to find a way for everyone to get access to the internet, not to basically the internet as a source of education and communication. So each book in the series focuses on one of those themes. So in Jack and the Geniuses, the central technology is this way to basically pull salt out of water. So you could turn salt water into drinking water. In Jack and the Geniuses in the Deep Blue Sea, it revolves around this new method of a new way of generating clean renewable energy. And then in Jack and the Geniuses Lost in the Jungle, it's all about spreading internet access, to remote areas of the world. So each of the book has one of those major themes. Now, the final and very, very important piece of these books is that they really had to have a cool setting, okay? So I think when you read a book, I love reading books, all kinds of different books. This is just like a small subset of my collection of books. But some of the books I really love are the ones that take you somewhere interesting, right? So they lift you kind of out of whatever space you're in right now and take you to some strange and cool and interesting place. Now, in the first book, they go to Antarctica. In the second book, they go to Hawaii. Now, we picked Hawaii for a number of reasons. Mainly, I love Hawaii, and Bill absolutely loves Hawaii. I think he said if there's anywhere in the universe he could go, it would be Hawaii. You'd expect him to say like Mars or Europa, right? But he's like, no, Hawaii. And then the third book, we send them down to the Amazon rainforest in Brazil because, again, it's just an absolutely fascinating, cool, wild place. So that's kind of like the spark and the genesis of these books and the rules behind them. Now, obviously, a spark is only the very, very beginning of a story. But even when I have a cool idea, I don't start writing right away. Okay. So the next thing I do, and this is really important, is I try to become an expert in whatever I'm writing about. So no matter what I'm writing about, I have to become an expert in that subject. So for instance, the Titanic book, Dangerous Waters, I tried to become an expert in the Titanic. I tried to learn as much as I possibly could about this famous ship. The same thing goes for the fish book. I learned everything I could about pirates. For this book here, this nonfiction book, which is Bill Nye's Great Big World of Science. If you zoom in, you can see my name up here somewhere too. Yeah. I actually interviewed 75 different scientists to learn as much as I could about their different fields so we could write the best book that we possibly could. Now, for the Jack and the Geniuses book, the process of becoming an expert for this first one, it really centered on Antarctica, right? If we were going to send the kids to Antarctica, we had to make it feel like you were there as a reader, okay? So unfortunately, this was kind of like a real heartbreaker. I couldn't go to Antarctica because it's really hard to get there, and we just didn't have a lot of time. So I did the next best thing, which was I talked to a whole bunch of scientists who go to Antarctica every year, and I grilled them to find out as much as I possibly could. Now, one of my favorite ones is this next scientist here. So this woman in the red coat here, she's amazing. So she is basically trying to figure out whether aliens could live on this moon of Jupiter called Europa. Every year, she goes down to Antarctica to prepare for a mission to Europa. Now, the reason she goes to Antarctica is that on Europa, you basically have this icy shell covering the planet. And then underneath this icy shell, there's a huge ocean, okay? Now, scientists think that there could be life in that ocean. But it's really hard to get to Europa, like really, really hard. And so we really got to be sure if we send robots there or a mission to there to explore it, we got to be sure of what we're doing. So to prepare, scientists go down to Antarctica, and basically you have the same kind of conditions where you have this icy shelf and then ocean underneath it. And so they can test their robots and they can test the conditions to try and basically get ready for this mission. Now, when I talked to her, I found out about all that kind of stuff, but I also just wanted to know, what is life like down in Antarctica? And I found out some really cool stuff, which you guys probably know already. But for instance, it's incredibly cold, but it's also a desert, which I thought was really weird. So there are all these little weird things, like when you're walking around down there outside, your skin gets so dry that it gets like chafed, rubbing against the insides of your clothes. Or because it's so cold and dry, you burn so many calories that the scientists were telling me that you end up eating like 3 times as much as you normally do. So they'll have 3 burritos for lunch and a whole pizza for dinner and all sorts of stuff like that. Now, what are some of the other details? Oh, the other one I loved was that they have 24-hour pizza down there. But anyway, I grabbed all these details in and I added those into the story with Bill's details and everything to try and make it feel like you were there in Antarctica with these characters. Now, personally, I absolutely love this process of becoming an expert in a story, or in a subject, because I think it just not only does it make you, sort of write a better story, but it's just kind of fun. So, for example, this next slide here, I found out all these cool little things, like, they in Antarctica at this one base, McMurdo Station, they wear these big coats called Big Reds. They have this bus that transports them around called Ivan the Terrible. There's this cool little phenomenon where these seals pop up through what they call seal holes to breathe through holes in the ice. But then when the seals go away, that water freezes over sometimes, and you have kind of like a thin layer of ice, and you have to be really careful because you could step on that thinking it's frozen, and then you could fall through. Now, this actually becomes a really important plot point in the story, and Jack actually uses it to his advantage. So it's kind of interesting. Now, I know there's a weird pair of underwear up there, and they don't actually relate at all to what I learned, but I just kind of thought it was funny. Now, after I become an expert in a story, actually, I'm going to tell you one more story. This whole process of becoming an expert, it can be awesome, and it can be like really interesting and fascinating, but sometimes it's also difficult. So, for example, one time I was writing a story about brain surgery, and I had done so much research. So I'd probably read hundreds of pages about this one kind of brain surgery. I had talked to dozens and dozens of scientists. And in fact, I went out to Cleveland in Ohio, and I went to like one of the most important hospitals in the world. And I went to the leading surgeon in the world who does this surgery. And I interviewed him for 2 hours, asking him question after question after question. When it was done, I thought, okay, I know everything I need to know about this brain surgery. And I'm thanking him and telling him it was so great to meet him and blah, blah, blah. And he stops me before I left, and he said, "Hey, Greg." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Have you seen the surgery yet?" And I was like, "Well, no, I haven't seen it." And he said, "Oh, you can't write about it if you haven't seen the surgery performed." And I said, "Oh, no, I'm good. I know enough." And he said, "No, no, no, you got to come see it." He said, "When are you leaving tomorrow? When's your flight?" And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, my flight's at like, 9 a.m." And he said, because I figured 9 a.m. was pretty early, and I figured there's no way he's going to have a surgery. He says, "No problem. I have a surgery at 6." He said, "You can come in for the first half an hour, then you'll still have a half an hour to get to the airport, and you'll have plenty of time to make your flight." So now I couldn't really say no, because my flight was actually at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I didn't want to be caught in this lie. So I said, "All right, fine. I'll come. I'll check it out." Now, I was nervous because I'm a little bit of a fainter. Normally, if I see something like that, I'm just going to like drop over and go down, right? So I thought, I don't want to go into the surgery and faint and ruin the whole thing. But I said, I have to become an expert. I have to learn about this process. So I go to the hospital the next morning. I get, follow the directions. I sign in. I go to the room they tell me to go to. I open the door, and I'm expecting to see, the surgeon and maybe a nurse or something like that. And instead, it's this big, giant room, lights shining down, weird machines everywhere. There's probably a dozen people inside helping out with the whole process, right? And I look, and in the middle of it all, the patient is there, and the patient is sitting in some kind of weird chair. It's almost like a dentist chair, but he's got a titanium halo strapped to his head, keeping it perfectly still. And the surgeon is right behind him, just like doing this little thing to his head. He almost looks like he's just giving him a haircut. It looks so casual. But I saw all this and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to faint. And I started to go turn away to leave, to run out of fear. And instead the surgeon sees me. He says, Greg, no, come on over, check this out. So I took a deep breath and I shook my hands out and I thought, please don't faint, please don't faint. And I walked over and I checked it out and I saw this guy's brain. It was crazy. I'll spare you the details. I didn't faint, which was very, very important. And I also wrote a much better story as a result. I used that scene that I witnessed as the opening of my story. And I ended up, the story actually won an award. And it was a really great lesson to me that no matter what, you can't say no to those experiences, and you have to try to become an expert in whatever you write about, because you're just going to write a better story. All right. All right. So after I'm an expert, I finally start to plan the story. And, you know, with Jack and the Geniuses, it was Bill and I kind of planning it together and working on these things together. I would get emails in the middle of the night from him about satellites and strange things like that. But my plans always look a little bit different. If you go to the next slide, this is the one for Jack and the Geniuses at the bottom of the world, where it's actually like I was writing. I have this wall in my office that I can draw all over, and I just basically had all my notes for the story and all these different ideas and directions it could go in. You can kind of see a little map of Antarctica in the middle there. Now, that was for that one, but then for other books, it's been totally different. So, for example, in the next slide, this is for my Titanic book, Dangerous Waters. I just had basically 20 pages of details of everything that I wanted to have happen in the book. Or the next one for my Atlantis book, here you'll see it's this random board where I've got index cards of things that are going to happen in different chapters. I've got drawings of what I want to, of like different scenes in the book. I've even cut things out of comic books where I know that I want a scene or an environment to kind of look like that, okay? Now, I don't really think it matters what your plan looks like, but I do think that you guys, all the young writers out there, I think you should plan your stories. And I'll tell you why, not just because your teacher tells you to. These two books are my perfect examples. So I did not plan Fish. I just started writing it. Dangerous Waters, I told you, I planned it out. Every single detail, I knew what I was going to say. Right now, I changed a little bit along the way, but I had made a really detailed plan. Fish took me 4 years to finish. Dangerous Waters took me 1 year, right? They're the same length. They're both good books. This one was just way harder to write because I didn't plan it out. Now, ever since this experience where I planned it out and it was easier, I plan out all my stories. So Bill and I planned out every book in the Jack and the Geniuses series, and then I planned out this Atlantis book down to every detail. All right, so after I've got a plan, I finally start writing. Now, I personally I love starting my stories in a notebook. I love writing in a notebook. I put headphones on, I listen to music, I try to shut out the world. And then I don't really wait to type it up and turn it onto the computer until I think it's really, really good and finished. Now, that usually is what I consider my first draft, but I know that I'm not going to stop there. I never stop at my first draft. Now, usually when I talk to kids, they think, oh, you know, you're a writer, you've written 12 books, you probably just snap these things out easy, right? I never get it right on the first draft. I always do at least 5 or 6 versions of a story before I'm really done with it. So for me, that next part of the process, the revising process, is really where you start to make your story great. Now, if we go to the next slide. Oh, we don't have to go to the next slide. Oh, there we are. As you can see, when I revise, I really, really dig into my stories and I change almost every single sentence. I mean, this is a page from Dangerous Waters here where you can see where I put my coffee cup down too. But I mean, I don't think I left a single sentence alone. I was changing everything in there, right? And this is what I do with all my stories. Right now, I'm working on my Atlantis sequel and I've ripped the whole thing apart. I've probably written 6 different drafts, and now it's finally getting to a point where it's good. Now, if we go again to the next one, once I'm all done, even when I print it out and I think it's going to be perfect and beautiful, I reread it and I decide, nah, I'm going to cut the whole second half of that page there. So I'm always making these big changes. And actually, one of the last things I work on when I'm finishing a story is I work on the beginning. And I try to make the beginning as compelling and exciting as possible. So with Jack and the Geniuses, if we go to the next slide, one of those last scenes where we've got the kids, and it's not, I like the moon there, but it's not actually, they don't do it at night, they do it in the morning. But that scene where they first sort of like break into and discover Hank's laboratory is one of the last things we worked on. We wanted to get that opening exactly right. Now, once I'm all done and the story's all finished and I don't have to make any more changes, then they go through I send it into my editor and they go through the process of creating a cover. Now, if you skip ahead 2 slides, the first cover we had for Jack was a little bit different. And this was pretty funny because if you look closely, they actually got my name wrong. Gregory Moore. Yeah, kind of a cool name. I like it. But my name's Moan, and my mom would be mad if it said Moore on my book covers. So we switched it up a little bit and changed it a little. And if you see the next ones, we started the first cover where we had everyone kind of in a silhouette and mysterious. And then for the paperback, they decided, let's see what everyone looks like. I don't really know what I prefer. I kind of like the silhouetted one, but I like to see them all too. Maybe you guys can tell me what you think later. But I want to leave a little bit of time for questions here. So let me just say, before I wrap up my little spiel here, that if any of you guys are interested in becoming a writer, the 2 little pieces of advice I have for you: fill a whole bunch of notebooks with your ideas. Right? Doesn't matter if they're good ideas. They could just be drawings of weird dinosaurs in high heels. And read a whole bunch of books, any kinds of books. All right. This was fun. I hope you like the Jack and the Geniuses series. The first book is fun, but then they go on these cool adventures to other places, like this one in Hawaii and then this one in Brazil, which I really love. That one's kind of close to my heart because I love Brazil. I think it's a fascinating place. Again, I want to thank you guys for sitting out there listening. I want to thank Mrs. Nemko, Mrs. Wagner, the Napa County Library, the Napa County Reads Commission, and BookMine, and everyone that's been involved in this whole thing. I'm pretty excited to take questions right now. I see a couple up here on the side. I'm going to start answering them. But if you guys have more questions, I think you can enter them in some kind of area somewhere. Now, let's see. Or are you going to take these? Oh, great.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Shauna with the Napa County Office of Education. So go ahead and type your questions into the chat, but we're going to go ahead and start with some of the first ones we got. And Oliver, who's a 5th grader at St. Helena Elementary, wants to know, when you were writing Jack and the Geniuses, how many times did you have to rewrite?
Geez, I don't, Oliver, that's a great question. Probably 5 or 6 times. And the funny thing was, like I said, the last thing that we really had to fix and get right was the beginning. So we kind of knew, we kind of got the ending settled pretty early, but the beginning was just, it didn't grab you enough. And so that's why we started the book. We really worked on that over and over again. And I like where it is now, where, the whole story starts with them kind of crouched in this alley, and Ava's got her drone, Fred, that she's flying across the street, and they're watching this whole scene. And what was cool is actually, this kind of came from my own experience with Bill, where one of the meetings Bill and I had to talk about this book and what we wanted to do with this series, we met in New York City, and we threw around 1,000 ideas, and then we said goodbye. And I got on the train, and I went on the subway ride under this East River over into Brooklyn. And I came up in Brooklyn, and I looked, and there were all these buildings that I hadn't seen before. I used to live in Brooklyn, and there were all these new buildings, and some of them were kind of cool and kind of glass. And I was looking at them, and I thought, ooh, what if one of those had a secret lab in it? And what if Hank really operated in there and nobody knew, and the kids were... So it kind of, this whole thing where I was stuck on the sidewalk just staring up at these buildings, imagining this, where Hank's lab might be, that kind of worked its way into the beginning. I didn't have any drones or anything like that. I'm actually terrible at building that kind of stuff. I love writing about it, but every time I try to do a project like that, something goes horribly wrong. Like I tried to, I had a coffee grinder that wasn't working once, and I'd been writing about these kids who, use spare parts to do cool stuff. So I tried to do something with the coffee grinder motor, and it exploded, and I burned my hand. Yeah. All right, let's go to the next one.
Okay, so we have looks like a parent helping their kindergartner who is joining us today. And her name is, sorry, I just lost it in the chat. Her name is Angel Maria, and she wants to know, how many books do I have to read every week?
That is a good question. I don't think there's any number. I would tell you what, try to read a little bit every night or every day. And as long as you're doing that, you're going to make progress. It could be the same book if you want to read the same book a bunch of times. I do that still. A lot of my books up here, I've got this kind of like favorites shelf that I reread. But the important thing is just to spend time with a book every day. That's what I think is important. But maybe my wife, she's a first grade teacher. Maybe she'd have a better answer for you.
I think that's a good answer. So, we have a question from Shauna Falk, who is actually the librarian at St. Helena Elementary School and a member of our Napa County Reads Committee. And she wants to know, do you only work on one book at a time?
That is a good question. I should only work on one book at a time, but I can only work on one. I can't, let's see. I can only work on one type of book at a time, but I can work on different books at the same time. So I worked on this book with Bill, which is nonfiction. So it's all about all the different areas of science. There's a chapter on climate change. There's a chapter on earth science. There's a chapter on exoplanets, and whether we could find alien life in other parts of the universe. So this is all nonfiction. So it's basically just explaining cool, awesome scientific facts and concepts for kids, right? Now, at the same time, I was working on this Atlantis book, which is a adventure, right? So it's totally made up. It's a science fiction book. So it's a novel to it's about this girl who lives in Atlantis, and Atlantis turns out it's this civilization that's been hidden under the sea for thousands of years, and they're incredibly advanced. And she is convinced that there has to be life on the surface, but she's always been told that there is no life on the surface and that Atlantis is the only world. And so she's convinced there's life on the surface. And then there's a kid on the surface who's with his dad and this other brilliant girl. And they're convinced that there has to be life down in Atlantis. And they end up finding each other. Now, massively different stories. One's totally made up and one's all based on real facts. So I can work on those kind of things at the same time. And what I would do is I would work on Atlantis in the morning, and then I would work on the great big world of science for the rest of the day. But I could never do two novels at once. Then my head would just spin.
Well, we don't want that to happen.
No.
Our next question is from Ashlyn, and she wants to know, which inventions would you want to have for your own?
Ooh. Ashlyn, I love that question. Which inventions? I kind of like I would say the motorized skateboard, but I'd probably fall off and hurt myself. The snow goer was kind of cool. That seemed like a lot of fun. I like the robo legs as well, but actually one of my favorites, the one I kind of want, even though I'm not super into heights, but there's this one in Jack and the Geniuses Lost in the Jungle. You can kind of see Ava's got something strapped to her belt, and that allows her to climb trees really quickly and like get to the top of a really tall tree in like 2 seconds, right? I think that would be pretty fun. Yeah. Now, can I take another one of Ashlyn's questions really quick? Or is that unfair?
Sure.
Yeah. So she also asked, how many books did you write? And so I think what's more important, so I've had 12 books published, and there are a couple more on the way. But I've also written 3 or 4 books that have never been published and that probably never should be published because they're terrible, right? And that just happens. Like sometimes you're going to work really hard on something, whether it's a story or something else, and it's not going to work out. And that's just part of life. Like it's something you have to get used to. Now, one of the stories, I think maybe I could resurrect it and make it a little bit better, but I don't know. I'm kind of focused on Atlantis right now. So.
Okay. So we have another kindergarten question from Santiago, who's at Napa Valley Language Academy, which is a Spanish-English dual immersion school we have here in Napa. And the question is submitted by Andrea. And it's, how can you get your book published in more than one language? I am bilingual and would want to write my books in both languages.
Ooh, Santiago, that is a really cool idea. So I think you just have to do it yourself. So right now, the way it works is, so Jack and the Geniuses has been published in a bunch of different languages, including Spanish and Catalan. And it's also been published in Korea. And that one's kind of cool because they like redid the illustrations too. So it's pretty neat. But there was a famous writer, this guy named Samuel Beckett. Actually have a picture of him over here. Let's see. This makes him look kind of weird because it's an illustration. So this guy, he didn't quite look like this. This guy actually was bilingual and he spoke French and English. English was his first language, but he wrote some of his first books in French. And then he worked with the translator to translate them into English. And so that's what I think you should do. I think you should write them in both languages and you're just going to be a superstar. That's how it's going to work.
That's great. We have a question from Mick. What's your favorite animal to write about?
Oh, I know the answer. Goats. I think goats are funny. So I try to work goats into all my stories. Yeah.
They are funny, especially when they stand on things.
Especially, yeah, totally.
So Jennifer is asking a question for Liliana, who is in 4th grade. What was your spark with Atlantis?
Ah, Liliana, thank you. That's a great question. So, and I have a real one, and it's not going to take me 20 minutes to explain, like with the Jack and the Geniuses story. So I was honestly just walking on the beach one day, and I'm going along the beach, picking up little fragments of plastic. You know, my kids and I were doing it. Actually, I think I was alone at the time. So I'm picking up little pieces of plastic, putting them in my backpack, going along, and there's just so much plastic and so much junk. And I started thinking, and maybe I was reading too many Aquaman comics because I kind of like this guy, you know, funny toy. And I started thinking, geez, you know, if Atlantis really existed, they would be furious with us because we're dumping all this trash into the ocean. We're changing the climate, which is also changing the ocean. So they would be really mad. They wouldn't be too happy with us people up here on the surface and what we're doing to the ocean. So that kind of became the initial spark. But then this little movie called Aquaman came out, and they had their whole version of Atlantis. So I had to kind of change my main idea so that I wasn't doing anything similar to what they were doing. But that was the initial spark, and it was a very quick one. And it's something, you know, I thought of it, and then I said, I'd been working on Jack and the Geniuses at the time. So what I did was I wrote down the spark, you know, the idea. And then I just kind of closed my notebook and said, I'll come back to this. And if this idea still excites me, this idea that maybe Atlantis, if it existed, would be mad at us, then I'll come back to it. And when I was done with the Jack and the Geniuses book with Bill Nye, I revisited that and I started thinking more about it. And I started thinking, well, if Atlantis was hidden down there, what would it be like? And how would it be different from our world up here on the surface? And I kind of got super carried away and started thinking about mermaids and anti-gravity technology and jetpacks. And yeah, it's a weird Atlantis, my version of Atlantis, but I think you'll like it.
Well, I bet a lot of people on here tonight are looking forward to reading it. We are going to have our last question now, which was posted by Ryan, but actually comes from August, a 4th grader also at MVLA. How does it feel to work with someone really famous?
That's a good question too.
A couple times, yeah.
You know, the famous people I work with, they're pretty nice people. I've gotten lucky. So I really enjoyed working with Bill Nye. That's why we ended up doing 4 books together. I really enjoyed working with Neil deGrasse Tyson. He was a pretty nice guy. Both really smart people and both professional. They got their work done. But the cool thing about working with the famous people, especially with Bill Nye, because we did all these events, whenever we went to give a talk, lots of people showed up, which is fun. First time I ever did a book talk for this book here, The Wages of Genius, I think 20 people came and 16 of them were relatives of mine, you know? and then I go do a book talk with Bill Nye, and 1,000 people show up. It's kind of fun. Yeah, that was the best part. But I think we're wrapping up right now. I just want to say thank you guys for staying on here. This was so much fun for me. Thank you to everyone involved. This has been a really cool experience. And I hope you guys read the rest of the books and just read any books, whether they're mine or not. Go to Bookmine, go to the library, pull out books, start reading.
Thank you. And on behalf of all of us here in Napa and the Napa County Reads Committee and the Napa County Office of Education, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we're all looking forward to reading a lot more of your books. Thanks,
All right,
everyone.
thank you.